Discovery.
3, 2, 1, 0, 0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast that's about other podcasts, where every single week we have a book club style discussion about a podcast. And at the end of the episode, we're going to talk about a brand new one, and we'll talk about that one next week. I'm Kirk.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Matt.
And this week we are talking about a show that we had been kind of circling around for a long time called Just the Zoo of Us. And we chose the episode 102, Plants, with Dr. Vikram Baliga. And this show, each episode, which I talked about this last time, but I'll say again, this is not your typical episode. Their typical format is they pick an animal and they go through and they rate it based on several different criteria, a lot of times with an expert. But this time the expert they brought in is the good Dr. Vikram Baliga, a friend of our show that is has an amazing look at kind of plants and making this information accessible. And so that's what this episode was about.
The plant prof.
There is two kind of co-hosts of this show, and if I'm gathering correctly, if there's a special guest, sometimes Christian won't talk as much, but it's Ellen and Christian Weatherford, both of whom are here in Florida with us in the Jacksonville area. And each week they pick an animal species submitted by a listener to research, review, and rate out of 10 in the categories of effectiveness, ingenuity, and aesthetics. So what'd you guys think of this show?
Very informative.
I really liked the show. I had listened to a few episodes. I think I listened to one about tigers, and then one about mooses, and then one about sharks, I believe.
It's meese, I think.
Meese? Yeah, that was it. I remember learning that. I'm kidding.
I learned that in geography class.
But yeah, I really liked the show, and I really liked the format, like specifically on the animal episodes where they talk about, it's almost like building a D&D character, you know, like the attributes of the D&D character and their stats.
Yeah, and that checks out. Both of them in their bios on their website mention that they like video games and that they like tabletop and things like that. So them adding stats to things as they're making essentially a D&D monster makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, we first met Vikram after Kirk actually introduced an episode of his where he was doing a live, I guess, Q&A type presentation about science fiction and how plants are similar to things that are already in science fiction. And then we ended up having him on our show. We were on his show. We've kind of hung out with him, and he just has really cool insight on all of this stuff. And he brings the same thing here. And so in this episode, they kind of take their typical format and then just kind of tweak it a little bit so that it applies to plants, because he's not talking about one specific plant like a lot of times they'll do. Like they have, it's the cool thing about this show is if you have a favorite animal, it's probably on here. And then there's a lot of animals you never heard of. So most of their most recent ones, you have the fossa, you have blue-eyed black lemur, you have the Malayan tapir, you have plants, you have the mantis shrimp. So it's you kind of pick a specific animal and then you run through this list of things and you see how it like plays out with this, like the scrutiny they're going to put it under. And so they did kind of the same thing here. So for like effectiveness, they asked him essentially what plants are better at adapting to their environment than others. And so they were able to kind of work this into a very organic and interesting way so that he can talk about plants and plant life in that same kind of fashion of their show.
Yeah, what did he start with? He started with that pine tree. You said he had mentioned with you guys before.
Yeah, he said it was his favorite tree. I forget the specific name of it, Zach. If you want to look it up real quick,
there's some scientific.
But it's what he has on his logo, and they were talking about like he was mentioning how they've found some that they've dated over 5,000 years old, which is crazy.
Yeah, and that the wood is so dense that like insects can't get into it. And even if they did, the wood itself has like insecticide in it.
Yeah, I think it's a bristlecone pine. That's what this is called. And yeah, I do love, and I really like that you get very specific and different and interesting answers from Vikram, because this guy's not going to pick some stupid tree, just like, oh, oak tree, boring. So he picked something it's visually really cool looking. And yeah, like you were saying, it grows so slowly that it ends up being incredibly dense. He said they were breaking bits trying to get a core sample of it to see how old it was. And then they kind of put in this perspective that if there's one tree named Methuselah that they estimate to be around 5,000 years old, and then you put that in context of humanity and how much humanity and changes this tree has seen, and it's just kind of like outside of it almost, it's so old. You know, when you're talking about something that's 5,000 years old, they compared it to the Ents from Lord of the Rings, and it's kind of true.
I love that nerdy reference because I knew exactly what they were talking about. But that was great because they were talking about how like the Ents were like, yeah, you know, you guys are funny. You know, you're just these little guys. You'll men come and go. You know, we've been here forever. You know.
I will say that he also mentioned another tree that was a bristlecone pine named Prometheus. And what he didn't mention, but makes perfect sense, was that it was cut down. And that's how they found out how old it was. They cut it down in 1964 and it was 4,800 years old. So it's like, well, good job, idiots. You cut down a tree that should not have been cut down. But now we know how old it was.
Some rich person's got a really nice dresser.
I thought about that actually. When he was talking about like how dense it was, is like, you know, that they had to be like, but they grow so slow that it probably would never work for commercial lumber. They get stuff that just grows fast and they do it. But yeah, if you imagine if you were like making all your furniture out of these bristlecone pines, that would be like indestructible furniture.
Back in the day, though, I'm surprised that we didn't just chop them all down because that's what we did. Yeah, we didn't know how fast they grew. Just like, hey, it's a tree. Let's cut it down.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like something we would do. You know, just I definitely think humanity would do that if they thought it was beneficial. But yeah, so then they start talking about kind of all of the different ways, and this is where there was a couple really interesting ones. Kind of ways that they use almost. And I mean, the category they have is ingenuity, and he was talking about just interesting ways they have evolved in conjunction with another animal. And that part was super interesting to me. He talked about lilies on here that literally they, I guess they have both like male and female sexual organs, but they can change night to night essentially.
It's
so
crazy.
The night they open, it's a female flower and they trick beetles into going in there, and then they close around the beetle. And then they turn into a male flower that has pollen the next day. So when the beetle leaves in the morning, it goes and pollinates other flowers. And they described it as being locked inside a Wendy's. Yeah. I consider it like I don't know that the beetle would hate that. That seems kind of like if you're at the bottom of the food chain and you're like, oh, I went in there and they gave me food and then he gave me a hug all night and then it let me go the next day and I just went and rinse, repeat my entire life. That's not getting locked in a Wendy's. That's much nicer than that.
As someone who's gotten locked in a Wendy's, it's not that bad. Free fries all night. I don't know why they gave it to me free, but
I don't know who this guy is. I don't know who this guy is, but I feel bad. Just give him some food. Just give some food to that guy.
What about the shrew? What was it?
Shrew poop
orchid, like an orchid.
The pitcher plant,
it was like
right?
A pitcher plant.
It's literally like a toilet for a specific rodent.
Yeah.
And that's what it wants to be.
It gets all of its nitrogen. It's cool. Like most need to be in soil, but because it's not in soil.
It's just so crazy.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
And I remember listening to we've talked about it on the show before, but it still blows my mind. It was a Radiolab episode where they were talking about intelligence. And they were talking about whether or not plants had a form of intelligence. Because obviously they don't have a brain, but there's a lot of scientific evidence to say they can kind of learn and stuff like that, which is crazy. And they were talking about a science experiment where I've seen the plant before. It looks like a fern. And if you touch it, it like curls up like to protect itself. Because normally, that means it's fixing to be eaten on or something. So
or damaged, whatever.
Up. Yeah. And so what the scientists had contracted is a thing where they would drop the plant a short distance, which wouldn't damage it, but it would give it the sensation that something was going to eat on it. And so the first, I think, 2 times they did it, the plant curled up. But then the third time they did it, because the plant had already known that this drop was not going to be damaging to it, it didn't curl up again. And at first they're like, okay, well, maybe, it's used all its energy and it can't, but then they go and touch it and it curled back up. So it was like it had learned, hey, this drop is not going to hurt me, but it was still had enough energy to still curl. It was really fascinating. No, talked about other things, but the fact that plants kind of have this, it's like an intelligence, but it's not an intelligence, it's hard to even explain.
Yeah, no, and I read there's a new book and / like research project that's starting to circulate now, and like literally has been optioned for movie rights at this point too. There is a researcher, Dr. Susan Simard, I think, out of Canada, and she has research that's called Finding the Mother Tree. And the entire premise of it is not only are forests communicating with each other through the microbial life in the soil somehow, but there is like a hierarchy. There is like a tree that has more say than others. And so like it's one of the really cool things about this time.
Tree mafia.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening that is negative all the time right now. But you start to look at how much better we're getting at using technology and understanding things. And there's just it feels like every day we're having a new breakthrough in something. We're finding out something that we never could have conceived of before, and understanding things that have always been around us, but we see them through a new lens because we're able to like look at that. And so it's really cool to kind of see these things. And it's always been a fun part of this.
Well, and I thought it was really interesting not to skip all the way to the end part, because there are definitely other plants that they talk about. But when they started talking about how trees can sense the green light from other trees and give them enough space so then that they don't take up their sunlight. And it was like, okay, so they're like sensing things. And when it talked about how their roots will send out certain chemicals that'll like push away other trees as well.
What was he talking about? Walnuts and pecans have like almost like an herbicide in them.
Yeah, herbicide basically. I did not know that.
Yeah, me neither.
And we learned about this recently at work too, where brassicas, collard greens, and broccoli and things like that, they do the same thing. Like many plants like to use the microbiology of the soil to get food. But there is some families of plants that are the opposite. They're like, everything get away from me. And they will literally put things into the soil to push away all that microbiology that would essentially stunt / kill normal plants. But that's just how they have evolved to like thrive in their situation. And so it's just always been so fascinating to like hear how specifically plants evolve. Like it is any possible environment. That was one of my favorite parts about this episode, was them talking about the desert plants and all of the like, because you always see those cactus, you see a Western, you see the giant cactus, but you don't think about all the very specific things that it's done to thrive in a desert specifically. Like he described it, and it was slightly disturbing, like a wet cucumber was the inside of a cactus. I mean, that's just Vikram being awesome. But yeah, it's like a wet cucumber that is covered in spines, but they're leaves. And so what they're doing is cutting down surface area so they don't like have as much evaporation from the leaf, and they can like conserve more water. And so something even like the spines, the most like...
Yeah, and I wouldn't have thought of the spines as leaves either, And him explaining that was fascinating, how there's kind of only a few parts of any plant, and we see the differentiation that's happened through time. But like, like the spines are leaves, and some things that look like, the fruits and stuff. It was really fascinating, him explaining all the different things that we visualize and we think, oh, that's like very unique. Like, no, it's a stem, but it's the way that this plant has its own stems that are like special.
I did also love that Ellen was able to bring a plant or like a animal based question to this, because she said essentially fruit is counter to everything the animal kingdom would do. You don't want to incentivize things to eat you. I think there's a couple rare situations where things like want to like trick something, because it's the anglerfish, right? That has like a little bait on it, but it doesn't actually want to be eaten. It wants to like draw stuff in, but it doesn't. But fruit is literally, please eat me and like put my seeds around. And so she kind of was able to bring a type of question that was based off how their show works and then apply it to kind of a different category. And so it led to like really interesting conversations, and led to maybe the craziest thing that he talked about in this thing was that exploding tree. So this, and if we will put a link to this sandbox tree, is what they call it.
Diabolical tree that exists
in
South Queensland, right?
Yeah. I think he said it was Australia, which makes sense. Checks out.
Yeah, totally.
But no, that was the Gimpy or something.
Oh,
that was the one that hurts.
Oh, that's the stingy one.
The sandbox tree we have here and in South America.
Oh,
I thought they were the same tree for some reason. I was like, damn, dude, this tree's intense.
I think the Gimpy tree looks probably nice. It doesn't look like
he said it was just
heart-shaped.
He described it as heart-shaped leaves.
Well, he also described it as having a toxic, what was it? Not
got a neurotoxin, doesn't it?
Yeah, but like all over it.
I will say it doesn't look like anything, which is a problem. Like if you were just like hiking, you would not notice this tree.
You'd go, I'm tired, and lean against it.
And it will wreck your world.
I think you had a discovery a while ago, Zach, about it, or one of us did, about that tree.
Yeah, I remember that, because people were like, it like causes people to commit suicide because it won't stop. The needles like stay in you. And literally, like he talked about in the episode, like a cold shower or something can reactivate the poison in it. And then essentially it's happening all over again. And
people have felt pain as long out as 2 years. From when they first were in contact.
I remember the discovery now. The guy wanted to commit, or maybe did commit suicide, because he used it after going to the bathroom.
Oh,
yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, basically the worst possible thing that you can imagine.
He didn't, but I remember him saying that it gave him like literally feelings of impending doom. Wasn't it that? Like it was like.
I mean, who could blame him, honestly, with that setup? That sounds like impending doom. But yeah, the sandbox tree looks like a cactus from hell, because the entire thing is covered in huge thorns. It is toxic in basically every way. It is the most standoffish tree that has ever existed. It doesn't want any interaction from anything. And then it has pumpkins on it, like little pumpkins, that when it dries out enough will fall from the tree and explode, and can shoot seeds at 150 miles an hour and up to 300 feet away from the tree. And that was quite the thing to think about. And so we looked up videos. I mean, they're terrible. We can put the best one we found, because there's not great videos of the seed exploding. There's some though.
Probably because you don't want to be around it.
I think that is why. They're like, I'm not putting a camera in front of that thing. Get out of here.
I did see a news video of someone that was a casualty because of it. That was interesting.
Can you imagine just walking through the forest and it just falls?
Yeah, they say it sounds really loud too.
It looks like a grenade, honestly. When it explodes, it looks okay. So imagine orange sections, but they're dried out, and when it hits the ground, all the sections shoot off really fast and explode outward. And so that would be quite the thing to happen while you're on a gingerly hike through the woods. So I mean, I guess it's just that guy had the worst luck of that day. He won the reverse of the lottery. But yeah, overall, really like the show. You know what I was thinking about when I listened to this? I have a couple times, at least to you, Kirk, I kind of talked about how I miss Discovery Channel and Animal Planet from when we were kids. You know, that feeling of you can watch Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin, and you can actually watch animals and not like reality shows about cats. And I miss that. But then at the same time, there's just a new avenue now. Because you put a show like Just the Zoo of Us, and then what I would consider like the cousin, the amazing cousin, where you just put them both together and it's great. Varmints. So you listen to Varmints and Just the Zoo of Us, and you kind of can scratch that itch. You can learn about animals from people who really care about them. And it makes it really a different format, but it's still kind of there. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about. I was listening, like, you know what? This is kind of that same feeling I would get where it's just like you're hearing interesting things about animals and it's fun. It reminded me of kind of the good old days of Animal Planet and Discovery Channel.
Yeah, I had my kids with me when I was listening to this, and they got in the truck and they heard that I had a podcast. So I was like, they're like, oh gosh. And then like 4 minutes in there, they didn't say anything and they were just listening because it was fascinating, and they didn't complain anymore because it was good. It was very interesting to hear about all these crazy plants, and of course Vikram's a great presenter. And
hey, out of curiosity, Kirk, what did they rate tigers, if you remember?
I do not remember. I listened to that a long time ago.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah.
I'm just curious if it's like tiger, 3 out of 10.
I forget what expert they had on there, but it was a really good expert. I think he worked at a zoo specifically with tigers or something like that.
Wait, was it the Tiger King?
Oh my God.
It's not Joe Exotic.
That would be the worst expert you could possibly pick. It's like, I went out there and I hit the tiger with a stick. That guy was an idiot. I've never seen anything like that show.
That show was a giant train wreck dumpster fire that you just couldn't stop watching.
I mean, there was literally a dumpster fire that burned down his entire...
a magic dumpster fire that eradicated all his crime histories.
I mean, I swear, we watched it at work, during our lunch hours, and every episode somehow got more insane.
So yeah, I'm not surprised it wasn't the Tiger King, but it would have been
Tiger King.
It would have been a weird episode if it had been.
Do you think the good doctor is like the plant Joe Exotic?
I don't think
he's
so.
way too nice for that. I mean, he might be beating up his plants a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to tell. He did say that he hits himself on a cactus every time he's around it. I do want to just start calling him the good doctor, because this is like a goofy show somewhere too.
Oh yeah. I also wanted to bring up the duct tape to get cactus needles out of your body. I was like, that's pretty clever. But I was also thinking of the physics. Wouldn't you have to push in on the cactus needles in order to get them with the duct tape?
I think so, but I think he's talking about the fine ones, the really fine ones.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think
Which
the
is
really
almost the only
ones,
experience I've had with cactus that has been negative is those.
Yeah,
because
everybody knows not to touch the really spiky ones, but the fuzzy ones.
Right, the fuzzy ones trick you into getting the fiberglass spinies in you.
Yeah, you go, come on.
I'm Mexican, so we have nopales, which is just like the big piece of cactus, the leaf, the big thing, and you're supposed to take all the little spines off with razor blades if you're going to eat them. And I remember being a kid, I'm like, oh, it doesn't have any spines on it. It must be already cleaned. And I'm picking it up, and I didn't know that all of those little bitty brown spots were all the spines. And my hands hurt for weeks because they were so small. You just have to look the right way to be able to see the hairs stuck in your hand.
Yeah, I will say that we used to carry, while I worked at the produce market, we used to carry tuna. So the prickly pears, the fruits on the cactus, same thing. You think they're all fine. They mostly take all the spines off, but you grab one out of the box and you get stabbed pretty bad. They taste good, but a billion seeds and they will stab you. But yeah, amazing show. Definitely go check out Just the Zoo of Us. Go find an animal that seems interesting, or find one you haven't heard of. Either way, it's going to be great because you're just hearing about animals from people who clearly love them and want to learn as much as they can.
You know what I want to see?
One of the cool things I learned about, I think I was on this show about moose, is that one of the things you never would think about is that moose are really good swimmers, and in Alaska and stuff, they'll swim across sounds to go to islands and stuff. And so they multiple times have been seen being attacked and killed by orca whales, which is insane to think of a moose.
Well, if I remember correctly, is that their primary predator? I think that's their primary predator is orca whales.
Just from swimming.
Yeah, no, I actually I think that's a fact.
That's wild.
But it's just so crazy. I mean, could you imagine just seeing a bunch of whales attacking a moose? Oh god,
I wouldn't. I would just not know how I was feeling about life. I'd be like, "What is happening? There are whales attacking that moose."
That was incorrect.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great show, and I have a recommendation for next week.
Oh.
The show that we're going to recommend is A Hot Dog is a Sandwich, and it's put on by two of the mythical crew from Good Mythical Morning. So it's the chef Josh, and I forget the other lady's name. Nicole and Josh are the hosts of the show, and the episode that I want to recommend is What's the Best Fast Food Burger? Featuring Dame Drops. And that's, I don't know. It's great.
It should be quite an episode.
Dame is a character. Me, Zach, and our other coworker have been watching some of his show, Fresh, Fried, and Crispy, which is on Netflix. And we actually watched that today at lunch.
It's what you think it is. It's about fried things.
But it's so good, though. He's so funny. The only thing I don't like, and Leah actually pointed it out to me today, she's like, this show, every time anybody's eating food, it's in slow motion.
It is. And I noticed that the first time, and it's terrible. We talked about this.
The only thing.
Because it's like a close up of his mouth eating in slow motion. It's like, I would not sign off on that. I'd be like, no, can you like put a black bar over my mouth when you're doing, like when I'm eating it? That's weird. That's a weird move to have that as part of your show. But yeah, no, it's a good show though.
But no, it's a really fun discussion on the best fast food burger. And I also want you guys to start thinking about what your favorite fast food burger is. Because ours are definitely going to be different because most of them are from like California. So they have a lot different choices than we do.
In and out.
I think they didn't even mention anything that I've ever tried. I think Josh mentioned like a Carl's Jr. at one point, and I know what that is. It's Hardee's here, but even that was different. But yeah, no, it's a really fun discussion. And
so we need to eat a hamburger every day for the next week, right? To like compare them.
Hungry after these episodes about food. I will say that.
We're all going to give ourselves health problems immediately by doing this test, but we'll do it for science.
Oh God.
For science.
For science.
Well, thank you guys for listening so much. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.